Hi, and welcome to Emsi webinars. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're very excited. We have Andy Durman, the Managing Director for Emsi UK, and also Duncan Brown with us today, who is Emsi's Senior Economist. If you have any questions during the course of this webinar, please put them in the question box on the control panel, and we'll endeavour to get back to those at the end of the presentation. You will be receiving a follow-up email which has the recording and also the slides, so keep your eyes open for that. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to Andy.
Thank you, Debbie, and hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. We're excited to switch gears as we think about the green economy, which I know is at the forefront of a lot of people's thinking as we think about how we build back better. So excited to share some of the expertise and the thinking that we're doing on this topic. As we normally open up, thank you to repeat offenders who are once again coming back to join us for another monthly Emsi webinar. It's great to have you back. For anyone new to us, just a quick intro to Emsi and the work that we do. Ultimately, our goal is to help you and your organizations to make better decisions about the labor market through having access to good, holistic, connected together insight about labor market dynamics and activities. We're typically working across the worlds of education, economic development and employment as people make key decisions that affect their futures and their connection into the labor market. So we're excited to work alongside you as you work through those great opportunities and the challenges that we face in our economy. So thanks for joining us there. And some interesting news that you may have seen elsewhere that's still pretty fresh, about a week old now. Last week we announced a very exciting merger between Emsi ourselves and Burning Glass, who are also very active in a similar way in the labour market and bring a great expertise. And we're super excited to be bringing the different skill sets and expertise and data coverage that both organizations have globally together as we unpick that. We'll of course be sharing more and more details as we go. So it's really exciting to be connecting with our friends at Burning Glass and to chart a very exciting data future for the new organization. So exciting times ahead for all of us, for sure. So before we dive into the topic of the day, I just wanted to bring in Duncan. Duncan, welcome.
Hello there.
And Duncan has been really helpful in helping us track just what's been happening across the economy. Whilst we will be focusing the majority of our time on the green economy today, did want to just give you a quick update on what we're seeing out there in the wild world of the UK. So Duncan, do you want to take us through a quick summary, as you said?
Yeah, we've just got two of the slides that we've been regularly tracking here. So the first one just looks at the sort of the standard headline labour market statistics. So on the left-hand side, we track the unemployment rate in black, the vacancy rate in purple, and the redundancy rate in green. The news continues to be good. The redundancy rate, which is the number of people being made redundant as a share of the number in the labour market, is getting pretty much back to normal levels already. And, you know, if you look sort of to the left-hand side of that green line, you can see that the real difference between this time and the recession in 2008-9, when it took some years before the redundancy rate really kind of came back down again. It sort of had a first bump down, but then it sort of dribbled down slowly. So actually, you know, that shows things getting back to kind of normal, which is great news. The vacancy rate is at another blip up after slowing down, and then the unemployment rate continues to fall, although not very quickly. Luckily, of course, the peak was not so high. Then on the right-hand side, we've got this Beveridge curve, which tracks the unemployment rate against the vacancy rate over time. And it's the purple bit that we're focusing on, which saw that collapse in the vacancy rate in the early phase of the COVID crisis, where the vacancy rate went from around 2.5% to 1% of the number of people in work. And then unemployment started around the sort of the middle of last year to start to increase, and then it's tailed off. But at the same time, it's tailing off because vacancies are coming back up. So you can see that we're sort of probably about 2/3 of the way back to sort of where the labour market was. I have a feeling this third might be slow going, for a bit, but things are all pointing in the right direction at least. Go on to the next slide, please. So we've been tracking this one too. So this one looks at each of 16 sectors and tracks two numbers, one of which we want to go low and one of which we want to go high. So the green lines are the share of the workforce that have been furloughed, and that data goes up to, I think, the end of April on this chart. And then the black line is our job postings data, which we want to be at or above 100%, because that was the level that it was at in February last year, before we really started to experience the effects of the COVID pandemic. And you can see, first of all, I mean, the job postings data is much more up to date because we track that daily. And the really good news there is that pretty much all sectors are now there or thereabouts at the level that they were in February last year. Even accommodation and food services at the top left there, which has been, by far the most affected large sector in the economy. This is hotels and restaurants. Recruitment is back up to normal levels, in fact, slightly above where they were in February last year. And so that's really good news. Sort of moderating that slightly is that we had a few sectors, construction at top right being one of them, probably the biggest standout on this, which had been above the levels of February last year, and they're starting to tail off a bit, but probably that's kind of catch up is kind of coming to an end, and they're getting back to more normal levels now. Obviously, the big question we covered a lot last week is furlough and what happens there. As I say, these data go to April, so really before the full opening up affected accommodation, food, and arts, entertainment, and recreation. So it's in the coming months that we'll begin to see what happens there. Otherwise, everything continues to move in the right direction, but I think we're sort of still waiting to see what happens on the furlough side. But overall, in terms of the data that we have, things continue to move in a strong and robust direction in terms of labour market health.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Duncan. And fascinating to hear the anecdotal evidence now coming out about shortages, skill shortages, labour shortages, and particularly fascinating in the accommodation and food services, where we can see furlough is still relatively high, and yet plenty of narrative about how we're struggling to get workers back working in that sector. So I think there's some interesting elements to unpick in time as the data catches up on those.
Absolutely.
Yeah, cool. So we'll be keeping an eye over that for sure as we go. Thank you very much. Useful to have that update, and great to see things heading further back towards normality again so quickly. So topic of today is really about thinking about the green economy. We hear a lot about it. It's being discussed regularly in all circles. I recently had the fortune of joining a Skills World Live radio show podcast on the topic. And so there's a lot of discussion, and we felt it would be really helpful to kind of look into this ourselves and share what we're seeing about the green economy. And share that with you, so that hopefully it can help you as you think about this for your own work. And of course, big focus pre-COVID, but even more so as we build back better and think about investment into sustainable and green technologies and industries as being a kind of a linchpin of the kind of recovery phase that we're in now. So today we're going to really try and understand what do we mean by the green economy. It's one of those phrases that gets bandied around. So let's think about that, and in particular, think about how we can start to truly identify what we mean by green jobs and the green economy when it comes to labour market statistics, so that we can then, of course, start to quantify and identify some headline trends. So let's start off then by actually posing the question, well, what do we mean by the green economy? And so the first place we would typically go is pose the question, well, is there an official definition of this? So I'm going to pose that question to you, Duncan. Is there an official definition of the green economy?
I should say I don't know, but we did actually prepare these slides, so yes, I do have an answer. Yeah, so the short answer is yes, but the longer answer is that not very sort of easily, in the sense that our normal official definitions, and lots of our audience will know about SIC and SOC, so the Standard Industry Classification and Standard Occupation Classification. Well, the Standard Industry Classification was the current revision is from 2007, and there's not a lot of account it takes of environmental industries within that. So, for example, energy production makes no difference between burning the dirtiest of coal and the cleanest living solar panel, wind power, water power, for example. And you know, that goes sort of for a few other industries as well that will hit upon that. So to get around that, the Office for National Statistics has a sort of a program called LCRE, the Low Carbon and Renewable Energy Economy. There it is, conveniently on the screen, with that very agreeable acronym LCRE, which they've been tracking for about 5 or 6 years, I think. And basically what it does is it surveys businesses, pretty decent sized survey, and they look to place them in the low carbon and renewable energy definition that they have. So they can be in many industries, but they have certain criteria to say that they are. And so this is very much a business level or workplace level definition. It says, is this a workplace that is working to deliver low carbon and renewable energy goods and services to its customers? And that's what they've been using. The data goes to 2019, so it covers sort of the larger part of the 2010s. And as it says there, it's a pretty big sector. It's 43 billion in turnover and 7 billion in exports and 6 billion in imports and 202,000 full-time equivalent employees. So, you know, a little under 1% of the workforce, if I'm doing my maths right. So about 2/3 of 1% of the workforce. So not huge, but you know, from small acorns and all of that. So the really interesting thing with LCRE is the trends, because of course this has been a sort of a period when you'd expect the sort of the green economy to really sort of be growing well over this period, but alas, on LCRE it doesn't seem to really hold up. So these are the sort of the turnover estimates, and then I think we've got the employment estimates as well. And what you can see, so that the sort of the black capital I shapes are the sort of the margins of error at the top, and so you can see that they're pretty much all overlapping, which means that the sort of the trend there, that it's sort of slightly rising up in 2017, 18, and then coming back down to 2019. Really, statistically, the sort of the best summary of these trends is that they're stable over time, and that's quite interesting, because it kind of goes against our sort of intuitive sense that the green economy is supposed to be growing. I mean, we, you know, if I think about those years 2015 to 2019, I think about the sort of you know, green economy rising in sort of salience as a subject rather than declining or even being stable. You know, we hear more now than we did sort of 6 or 7 years ago, say, about low carbon and renewable energy. And you think about the sort of the ongoing conversation about sort of automotive with hybrids and electrics. You know, Teslas have sort of become a visible sight on the road, and lots of other brands are available, of course. And you know, much more awareness about the plastics issue during this time period as well, in the recycling space. So yeah, lots of kind of things have become more front and center. And I think 2015, if memory serves, was when the Paris talks on climate change were, which kind of set the tone for sort of the climate change discussion since then. So yeah, it's a bit of a conundrum really, that sort of you know, we really expect to see sort of the green economy growing, and yet on the sort of the best data that we have from the ONS, it seems to be pretty stable. So that's quite an interesting trend, really.
Absolutely. No, thank you for sharing that. Well, I think also what it probably does help us to question is this definition. Does it really actually truly explain what we think of as the green economy? Is it as simple as finding just those businesses that feel they are contributing, or is it more than that? And of course, I think probably as any long-time observer of the labour market and labour market information will realise there's no such thing as a simple answer, is there, in this world? And so actually it is significantly more complex than that. So Duncan, as you've been thinking about this, and we use ELCRE as a kind of a start point, it's a good start point. What you described there in the fact that its definition is fairly specific.
Yeah.
But actually, as we ponder internally and think about what we think of as the green economy, what are those different layers that we're actually thinking through that probably give a slightly more rounded view of what the green economy really is?
Yeah, so a good way to think about this is to think about green as analogous to IT and digital. And so digital is what in economics is referred to as a general purpose technology, so it affects all parts of the economy in the end. And that impact is really felt over time in different ways. And so, first of all, we have the sort of the business level, and this is what ELCRE focuses on. And so, so if you can flick up the first, the visual there. So, the business level is where you've got workplaces and organisations which are focused on making goods and services that are about the subject that we're talking about. So in digital, of course, if you think about the sort of the core of the digital economy, and we know the names, IBM or Google or wherever, and these are businesses that are wholly focused on that. But then you've also got the jobs dimension, and so in jobs terms, a large part of digital jobs, the same with green, will appear in those businesses, but many won't. And so if we think about it in digital, we have IT managers in lots of places, but we also have programmers and web developers in lots of other industries. There are universities, say, that have those kind of roles on staff, or manufacturing companies. And so the same can apply with green as well, that you've got these environmental roles and people who are concerned with sort of environmental solutions, about improving our use of materials, about sort of minimizing waste and all these things. And a lot of those will be in dedicated green businesses of the kind that ELCRE is picking up, but many of them will be elsewhere. So if you're at a chemical works which has a huge environmental impact, well, 40 years ago, there probably weren't that many people who had a dedicated environmental role in that setting, because it was kind of, less of a concern. Whereas now you'd expect to see more of them. So they're not in a green industry necessarily. In fact, actually, we may even think of it as the opposite of a green industry. But they are doing a green job. And so that's the first point to say, that green jobs don't necessarily go in green businesses, and as I say, just the same as digital jobs don't necessarily go in digital businesses. In fact, we know in that setting around half of IT jobs are not in IT businesses. But then we've got this additional angle, which is about skills. And so, and again, I'll come back to digital as a sort of a comparison. If you went back to sort of when I entered the workforce, which was in biblical times, I'm sure you'll say. But it was the sort of the late 90s, actually. So when I started full-time work, and I had a job where I had an email account of my own, and that was not that common at that time. I had friends who didn't have that, and whereas within about 10 years that had become the norm in huge parts of the economy. And equally, even if people did use IT, they often use custom systems, whereas now there's certain sort of types of software that people have in their environment that they're expected to use, and some of them are carried quite widely. Think about Microsoft Office. Back in the sort of the early 90s, people wouldn't have been expected to know about how to use the different parts of the Microsoft Office suite unless they were in very specific jobs. Whereas by the end of the 2000s, a large part of the economy just assumed that you would know how to use that, and if you were joining it as a sort of a new recruit, you'd be expected to get your head around those kind of things. And the same with green, that green becomes, environmental impact becomes a part of lots of people's jobs, that wasn't there before. So if you think about that chemical works example, they may hire environmental professionals to kind of engineer their systems to be environmentally friendly, but they also might begin to expect their shop floor workforce to be mindful of environmental issues, to sort of implement the policies that are set, to be on the lookout for improvement opportunities to cut the waste that they generate, and to minimize any kind of environmental impact in terms of emissions or whatever. And so you can have this thing where lots of jobs which aren't green in any way start to have this kind of green dimension added in terms of the skills that employers are looking for, because green becomes just part of everyday work.
Interesting, fascinating. So it's one thing setting that out, Duncan. It's another actually then being able to translate that into data. So talk us through a little bit about, we've obviously covered the businesses dimension from ELCRI, and of course later on I'll provide some links there if you're interested to look into that. It does break it down into kind of sub-segments, etc. But obviously to really truly understand the greenification of our economy, we want to look at that jobs and skills dimension. So talk us through a little bit about how you have kind of addressed that, starting from a job dimension.
Yeah, I mean, what we were most interested in is the sort of the jobs and skills kind of aspects here. I mean, we could look at jobs in terms of occupation, and it should be said that the occupation classification SOC is a bit better than the industry one from an environmental perspective. But we really wanted to have some comparable data around the jobs and skills area. So we have our open library of job titles, about 70,000 different titles that we've spotted in there. And so what we looked to do was build out a list of obviously green job titles. So we used sort of a set of keywords to identify all those that have things like renewable and environmental and green in there, and low carbon and all the rest of it. And then we sort of QA'd that list, because obviously you get the occasional one like, you've used conservation, and some of it's about conserving artwork and things like that, so you want to strip those out. And we ended up with about 365 job titles, and we've categorized them into these groups that are on the screen there: renewable energy, environmental services, and so on. In this sort of the next webinar, we're going to dig into those groups in a bit more depth. But for today, we're just going to focus on the headlines across them all. But yeah, so that gives us a sort of long list of different jobs that we can then use to sort of use against our job postings data to sort of see what employers' demands are over the past sort of 5 or 6 years, really. So if we go on to this sort of the first chart, so using those job titles, we can see that in contrast to ELCRI, there's a much more decisive growth trend here. Especially if you're looking that period sort of into 2019, really sort of strong, robust growth. 2020 has a dip, but then COVID does that to most parts of the workforce and the labour market, so that's no surprise. But you'll see that already the demand for green jobs is back up at the highs of late 2019, early 2020. So demand seems to be very robust and is a lot higher, sort of double the level that it was 3 or 4 years ago. So this is really stark contrast to ELCRI, that at the job level, in terms of recruitment demand, there is really kind of gathering interest around green jobs. And so what we can do as well is look at some of those titles to see which ones have been sort of standing out in terms of the increase in volumes. And so what we did was we took the sort of the year, the latest year available across 2020 and 2021, and the earliest year, 2016 to 2017, and we sort of compared job titles to see which ones had the sort of the biggest increase. This is in volume terms, and you can see there's quite an interesting mix here. Sustainability consultants at the top there, more than doubling, sort of 2.5 times the level of demand in the last year, which includes some COVID period, remember, compared to 5 years before, or 4 years before, actually. Then you've got environmental health officers in there, which is quite an interesting one because you'd expect that to have been a more established area. Sustainability in there again. Renewable energy, of course, is a sort of a growing area, and so analysts and engineers in there. Recycling managers, a big increase, but from a high base, and of course recycling has been a big concern over the past 25 years, really, and sort of a lot of the change has already happened, but it is a big area that continues to grow. And then solar comes in there at the sort of the lower end, starting from a very low base in some cases, but actually increasing quite fast. And so you can see that sort of there's a mix there between the sustainability and the energy side. But you know, across all of these categories, there's really quite big increases in the volume. So what we did as well is that we wanted to look at this skills dimension, and so using the 8 groups of job titles, we looked for the skills that were most characteristic of them, that were most heavily concentrated in those groups of titles. And again, we did some manual quality assurance to make sure that they were genuinely green skills in some way, and weren't just skills that were concentrated in those, but could be administrative type skills. And so that gives us a list of 112, and we can track those as a group to sort of see the trend there. And sort of the first thing, and of course, as we were touching on earlier, is that this allows us to start looking into not only the green jobs themselves, but the wider group of them, and how that we're greenifying, to use this horrible new word that we've invented, to sort of see how that's changing them. So on the skills for green jobs side, obviously what you end up with is sort of fairly predictable kinds of things. If you're hiring sustainability consultants, then sustainability becomes a concern. If you're hiring renewable energy engineers, then the ISO 14000 standard, which is about sort of environmental efficiency, comes into play. Recycling managers have environmental health and safety. These are all quite predictable. But on the traditional jobs, you get these kind of more interesting ones. So ready mix drivers, delivering cement and so on, and now expected to sort of have mind to environmental health and safety. Gas engineers straying into biomass and renewable energy in a way that probably wouldn't have been there 10 or 20 years ago. And then health and safety managers also have to give mind to environmental resource management. So you can see these kind of green jobs moving into territory which isn't strictly green. So the green skills entering these jobs, and so it begins to have a bit of an effect there. And that's the kind of the margin that we're really most concerned with when we look at the skills, because we've already looked at green job titles, so we have a good measure on those, and it's good to see that the skills are there because that confirms what we're looking for. But it's this extra area where the skills start to be called for elsewhere that we're more interested in. And we can track the trend, and you can see that the impact is huge compared to green jobs strictly. So green jobs is kind of in the sort of the 1,000 to 2,000 a month sort of space. So about 20,000-30,000 jobs a year, something like that. And that's in keeping with the LCRE kind of numbers, but a bit larger because the green jobs appear elsewhere. Remember that LCRE is measuring the number of people employed in those places, whereas job postings are measuring the number recruited. And so you have to take into account that's just the churn factor of how many jobs are being recruited at any one time. But if you look at the number of jobs that are requiring these green skills, you can see that we're into the sort of the starting around 150,000 a month, and more recently getting to around 250,000 a month being advertised, which is more than the number of people working in the LCRE workplaces at all. And so you can see that this is actually a significant part of labour market demand, something like probably about a quarter of, about a fifth of jobs being advertised have some kind of green skills dimension to them. And then we can look at the skills that are rising in the same way that we did the titles. Sustainability comes top. It's a bit of a catch-all, but it is interesting that it is up there. You'll note that the rises are for these individual skills aren't so huge as they are dramatic for titles, but there is quite an interesting mix here because you've got the sustainability ones, the health and safety ones, some land and forestry ones, and you've also got geographic information systems because, of course, a lot of environmental questions are about location as well, and so you can see, the sort of the volumes here are significantly larger than they are for titles. And what we did as well is look at those that were small to begin with and are seeing the fastest growth. And here, the sort of the utility sector comes in strongest: grid connections, renewable energy, water quality. You've also got things like energy policy and environmental studies, so these kind of more strategic questions, Yeah, so you can see that the sort of the mix of skills, represented by the green economy is quite large, which reflects its broad footprint. As I say, it's a large number of job postings that have some kind of environmental dimension on there. So to sum it up, defining and identifying the green economy is tricky, and it always is when you've got a new emerging part of the economy. We're pretty good at measuring the digital economy now, but that's because efforts have been going on for sort of 50 years in varying forms. The green economy is something that is kind of only really sort of begun to become significant in the last 10 or 15 years, so we're in early days. It's not just about new businesses, this trend. Just as it was with IT, it's about new jobs within existing businesses and industries. And it's also about new skills demands that are added onto existing jobs. So all of a sudden, jobs that in the past would never have been considered to be green are now having green edges added to them. The business footprint does seem to be stable, and that's an interesting fact that I think is worth further exploration around L3. But job demands, and as we see, skills demands especially, are growing fast. And so the sort of the intuitive sense that the green economy is rising in significance does actually seem to bear out. Using job posting data has its upside in that it gives us a way to actually understand the skills content dimension of changing demand in a way that traditional sources of labour market data don't allow. They will allow us to look at the occupation level, which is great, but that skill dimension, the greenification of existing jobs, you need job posting data to look at. Excuse my computer while it beeps at me. The next steps as we go on from here will be to start to understand the different dimensions of green jobs and skills demands, because green covers such a wide range of things in terms of things like renewable energy. It also includes things like environmental education and environmental consulting and environmental policy, but it also includes things like waste minimization and solar energy as well. So actually understanding these different dimensions will be sort of the next stage in the process, I think.
Great, fascinating stuff. Thank you so much, Duncan, for sharing the work you've done thus far. And just a few headlines, as you say, it does paint a very clear picture of significant scaling in demand right across the economy. As you say, somewhere like 1/5 of advertised jobs having some type of green skills being mentioned. I think that's only ever going to get bigger, isn't it, as we think about how our economy is changing. And I think poses some really fascinating questions, not necessarily for this webinar or even our next webinar, but more generally into the discourse on this, which is, of course, the skills demands and how we meet those skills demands. And I think the fascinating thing for me is a lot of conversation, of course, is about how we meet the new jobs that are coming and developing. But so much of what we've seen here is also about how we help those already in the workforce in existing roles gradually evolve their skill set to meet the ever-changing shape of policy and I suppose restrictions that are imposed, thinking about everyday jobs, electricians and plumbing and all sorts, where clearly more and more skills, green skills, are starting to come into it. So there's a whole shift needed, not just about how we help new entrants to the labour market enter with the right skills, but actually how we upskill the existing workforce to ensure that they have the skills that will help them evolve through the workforce as the needs of the workforce change. So I think there's some big discussion to be had, and we're glad to be able to bring some of the specificity that we are to that topic, and to help you guys who are at the forefront of solving some of these challenges and putting the right programs and policies in place. Hopefully we can help illuminate that for you as we go. So fascinating stuff. Thank you, Duncan. And on that point, of course, as we say throughout, we're sharing this learning and this data because we want you to know that we really can help, and we want to help. This is part of what we're all about, and we want to bring as much of this knowledge to bear, as well as thinking about the data and resources that we have. So just to point you, based on a few things we've covered off today, and you will be getting a copy of the slides, so hopefully you can follow these links through. But Duncan recently had a short article published on this topic in the Campaign for Learning, the recent Campaign for Learning journal. So there's the link there, and I'd encourage you to dig into that and some other really interesting articles as well alongside Duncan's there that should be interesting and helpful to the topic. We've also mentioned the ELCRI work at the Office for National Statistics. Here's the link through, so you can kind of find that data for yourself if you're interested in digging into that. Very much a high level view, but a good start point for sure. We've obviously also referenced a number of the Emsi data infrastructure, particularly around the job titles and skills dimensions. And I'm sure you're fully versed, but if not, both of those libraries are fully open and accessible. And the two URLs on the screens there will allow you to access those libraries and interact with those libraries and dig into them. So if you want to find out more, follow those links through and you can find those. And of course, we sit on a whole wealth of labour market data as we help unpick and understand the dynamics affecting different parts of local economies. And I think our challenge continues to be to you, as this clearly is a strong emerging part of our economy. How can you, whether as an educator, whether as a regional economic planner, whether an employer or a recruitment agency helping employers to access the right talent, how can you really understand what the opportunity looks like, what the demands look like? Well, we need to take a lot of what we've just shared here and dive down into your specific area of focus, whether that's an industry setting or a geographic setting. And really, the sorts of data that we have is really about posing the question about what does it look like in my area, specific to my area. So we presented some headlines. Of course, there will be variations based on the nature of our local economies. Certain aspects of those industries just won't be found in some localities and will be more predominant in others. So how can we help you get a lens on what the green economy looks like in your local area? But also, I think as this is a fast evolving area, what can we learn about clusters elsewhere in other regions that we might learn from or understand that we can bring back to our own communities? So not just always about looking at our own area, but thinking beyond that and think about what we can learn from other areas, centres of excellence. So we have a raft of tools and data and expertise, and hopefully this just illuminates another dimension of that, that if we're not already helping you with these sorts of topics, then please do get in touch. We would love to hear from you and help you understand how we can be supportive of you. And actually a little bonus coming your way in the coming weeks. So we hope to have this ready by early July ahead of our next webinar. But we actually are busy preparing a suite of brief local area overview reports, taking the definitions that we've shared with you today and looking at those across the country. So keep an eye out for that free report. Have a look at the Emsi blog. I'm sure we'll notify you anyway via email and the usual communication channels, but we'll also be communicating via our social media and Twitter and LinkedIn pages as well. So as I say, keep an eye out for that. Hopefully we can illuminate some of that. And I should add, for existing customers, particularly analyst customers, we're busy building these definitions of a list of titles and skills. We are thinking through and working on how we might start to identify those and help you identify them as groups within your analyst tools. But it could well be that we can at least share those lists. So feel free to reach out to your account manager if you're interested in getting the list of 360 odd job titles or the skills. I'm sure there's a way we can at least give you that list so you can build those as groups into your own tool ahead of us sorting that out from a product perspective. So do reach out there to request that. But as I say, keep an eye out in early July, and then as we come through to close out The month of July, Duncan and I will reconvene as we dig a bit deeper, as Duncan's been hinting at as we've gone through, to share some further, more detailed insights and a chance to remind you about what we're seeing in those reports. And I, for one, am particularly interested to see what the geographic dimension of this looks like and how that varies greatly. I imagine it will, and it'll be great to see the data and look across those reports as they become available. So yes, keep an eye out for that, and be sure to sign up on the Emsi webinars website to get your place on the next webinar as we dig deeper into the data behind the green economy. So thank you very much for joining us. Sadly, we have to rush now away to another appointment. Duncan, thank you for joining me today and for contributing some fantastic content, and looking forward to working together on the next webinar. So thank you very much. Yeah, apologies, we do need to dash. The life of busy green economy data peoples. But thanks for any of the questions that have come through. We will keep an eye over those and come back to you separately after this, but apologies that we need to rush off quickly. But thank you. I'll pass back now to Debbie to close us down.
Thank you so much. That was a really interesting webinar. Thank you. Look forward to seeing everybody on the 28th of July for the next one. Really looking forward to finding out a bit more in depth what's going on. But thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you soon, and take care. Thank you.